Hello and welcome back to the Ever-Changing World podcast. I'm your host, Ava Zanetti, and first off, before I go into any topic of today, I want to apologize for this episode going up late. If you're watching this episode, listening to this episode weeks later, or whenever you might be listening to it, this probably does not affect you. But if you are listening it to the week that I post this, I'm currently recording the episode on Tuesday instead of Monday. I was very busy yesterday on Monday. I had everything planned. I knew what I was going to talk about, but unfortunately, things kind of didn't go my way. People came over, and then there was no time to do recording of the podcast episode. So I was unable to do that, but I am back today. I am able to record. So usually when I post these episodes, if anyone, I guess, listens right away, I always record them at post them at 6 a.m. And today, unfortunately, I didn't record it yesterday. So I'm currently recording this around 4:30 p.m. and it should be up by 6 p.m. tonight. So a little late, about a good portion of time late. But I'm sorry about that. The podcast is going up, though. We're going to get through it. And today's episode is going to be pretty chill, anyways, if you want to use that word. It's going to really just look at something that I've always found very interesting, and I actually gained inspiration from last week's podcast episode, which I do want to touch on. Last week I discussed the history of the Ukrainian and Russian conflict. Of course, they are currently at war. I didn't get to a lot. I wanted to talk about the invasion. I didn't even get close to that. Also, I want to talk about Russian propaganda, what we know, some kind of memes during it, which I also found very interesting. You know, the memes of these big conflicts. And that's pretty much what I'll be talking about today. Today's episode, I really wanted to look at not just the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, but I wanted to look at kind of all these big things that have happened. Obviously, the other big example right now is COVID-19, as I'm recording this in 2022. Just still pretty much going on, and I'll talk about that in a second, but I really wanted to also look at kind of this internet dark humor meme culture that goes on, and how it's pretty weird if you look at it, and also how it's probably not necessarily the best thing we can be doing as a society, but it's also, in some ways, you could argue against that. So I'll be talking all about kind of that dark humor internet culture in this episode, and kind of give a good insight onto that, and I hope you guys like that. So kind of going on to doing a little bit of an intro before we get into the meat of today's video. I'm still currently reading the same book. Lately I've been doing a what book am I reading, and I am still reading the same English book that I was reading last week. So not really too much to say about that book right now, but I am looking into properly reading soon. I'm currently on March break. My school does 2 weeks of March break, so I'm currently home, and I have lots of time, but I have lots of things to prepare. I have a club that I'm running at school, and I have a sport that I'll be playing. I'll be playing rugby as well. I, obviously have school, and I have to keep up with that. So there's lots going on, but I am obviously always super excited to record the podcast episode, so no episodes should be late here on out for sure, or at least in the foreseeable future that I can see for any reason. There shouldn't be any late episodes, so you guys should not worry about that. And I'm super excited to obviously just kind of be sitting here and talking again and talking about this interesting topic, because with this kind of dark humor internet topic, I find it to be kind of weird in a sense, because it is a really weird, touchy topic in a way. It's something that I feel like people don't look at too much. And obviously, in this podcast, in the Ever-Changing World podcast, we kind of look at every different topic that I'm interested in, right? I talk about really every single different thing you could ever imagine. And this is something that I've always been super interested in, especially now. And these past few years, there's been a huge rise in this, or at least a rise that I have personally seen being on the internet in the sections I've been on the internet from, because the internet is kind of, a funny place. So, again, I just want to say sorry for having this podcast episode late. As well, I do want to say, for Russia and Ukraine, I do want to do another podcast episode. This is kind of like an add-on to the Russian-Ukrainian podcast, but not really. I'm really hoping to have this, the next Russia-Ukrainian one up in a few weeks. I'm not sure if I'll do it next week. I'm thinking of actually doing the NFT one next week, since I haven't done that one. But I think talking about the Russian-Ukrainian conflict in a few weeks will be good, because it's still, again, every day there's a new development. It's very hard to kind of keep up with that when I'm not recording an episode every day, right? So, I think that is probably my best bet. As well, if my voice sounds a little weird again, I did just get my bottom braces on a week ago, I believe. I have both my top and my bottom braces on now, and I have a lot of calluses in my mouth. I really have to say they do hurt. So I kind of feel in pain a lot with them on. So if you kind of hear my voice sound a little weird, that's probably why. As well, I do have to say a little bit of a positive light, because I am going to be talking about COVID in this episode as well. I know it can be a touchy subject, but I do have to say that I am super excited, because in Canada, right now I live in Ontario. In Canada, we are going to be maskless in almost every single area in actually a week. I'm super excited for that. I get to go to school without a mask on, first time in 2 years, and everything's really clearing up. The world is opening up in some regard, and it's really positive, but also obviously there's wars and bad stuff that happen too. So I mean, maybe that's why we use dark humor to cope. And I think that's a great transition into today's episode. Today's episode, I really want to look at dark humor and kind of the internet meme culture tying into that. So, obviously, I wanted to talk about the rise of dark humor, but I don't really know how if I can even pinpoint that. So I'll see if I can kind of figure out a way to do that. Obviously, I'm going to talk about the benefits and negatives, internet culture as a whole, because internet culture, I could just have a whole podcast channel on it, but I don't, obviously. As well, maybe the effects on people, and obviously a bunch of examples. So today's episode might be kind of sporadic. Usually in the episodes, I try to keep in kind of one linear path in terms of what I'll be talking about. But today's episode's gonna be probably sporadic, maybe a little bit off the rails in a way, but I think it'll be really good to kind of open up this topic for discussion and, maybe just get you thinking about kind of these issues that we might have as a society in terms of the internet. Because the internet, is a new thing. It's a very new thing, and the culture on the internet is still pretty much new. So I am kind of going to first talk about, why maybe we use dark humor as a coping mechanism, as well as maybe the rise of dark humor. This article, I believe this is a scientific paper that I'm on right now currently. It's on a science website, nature.com, I believe, scientific reports. So I believe it's going to be, there's an abstract. So it's, this particular one is an academic paper. So I don't really know if I'm going to muddle over all the boring details of dark humor. So I might find a new article. I think that might be a great idea. I think this academic paper is talking about how it's rooted in the brain, which I think is very interesting, but I might need the Sparks Note version of this, so I'm going to try and find another article. Let me see. I really, the thing about this is I really want to, think about why we use dark humor in general, because obviously there's a huge culture on the internet, but the dark humor didn't just start when the internet popped up, right? It wasn't like, oh, here's the internet, we're just going to start using dark humor. Dark humor is something that's kind of been a part of our society and maybe rooted in our brains in some manner for a very long time, and I think that looking at maybe why we use dark humor in the first place can really open up our world, because to be honest, I use dark humor a lot. Maybe as a little bit of a preface on that, my father passed away when I was 10 months old. So, for me, my whole life, I've always used dark humor. And sometimes, my mom will say, Ava! And, kind of yell at me in a sense when I maybe use this dark humor in an offensive way, you could say, but I justify it saying, it's the way I cope. And it's always so funny because when you really look at that, it's like I'm saying these kind of really horrible things and I'm saying it's the way I cope. So, dark humor can be used in a lot of ways. And really, I think I draw the line as when if these things are not directly affecting you, why do you need, to use humor in the first place? I think it's a very strange concept, especially with the internet, because now we have access to news all over the world, so people can obviously over dramatize things in a way, and I think that's also something I want to touch on today. Anyways, a little bit of a tangent there. Obviously I think a lot of people use dark humor, and I know a lot of comedians use it too, right? We see dark humor almost everywhere, so I don't think it's a surprise that there's a huge maybe even a huge sector where dark humor is really heavily used, in comedy obviously a lot, but I think there's it's a really weird, it really depends on your morals where you need to draw the line. So currently I'm in an article from Gizmodo, again, always linked in the bio of my videos. So this article, I believe, was written by Daniel Kultz. And also, I think he did research on Peter McGraw, who is a professor of marketing at the University of Colorado Boulder. And he's some sort of director. So this was his quote. I want to make sure it's his. I believe it is. So this is the quote here. So, quoting, "The work we've done in the Humor Research Lab suggests that people laugh at things that are, quote, wrong yet okay, end quote, threatening yet safe," again, that's another quote, "or we can call Bain violations. These are all predicted on something that threatens the way we think the world ought to be. Tragedies, comedies, pandemics, these are all great fodder for jokes, because they already satisfy half of the requirement: the wrong, the threat, the violation." So kind of, deciphering this quote, if you want to say that in a way, when we're looking at kind of what he said here, humans, us, we look at a way where, these dark situations that arise, right? I'm going to use my example of my father passing away because that's a very easy example that's close to me. This is not something that you would expect, right? My father passed away when I was 10 months old, so it's a bit of a different situation. But you don't just expect your parent to die, right? You always expect, or at a very young age, right? You always expect your parent to die when they're 8. You expect people to die, right? When they're 80, right? Probably around that age. So you don't expect them to die at, 30-something with a 10-month-old baby. So when you're looking at this situation, like, Peter said, that's not how we would think the world would be, right? We wouldn't think that my father died at such a young age. We wouldn't think that a pandemic would be brought upon us. We wouldn't think that a war would happen to us. As well, I think there's a huge thing to be said about that fact of ourselves always thinking that the bad will always happen to other people but never happen to us. I think that's a podcast episode I'll save for another day, but to touch on it, I think that's a really huge sector. I know a lot of people, and I know myself too, you always think none of these bad things will happen to me, because that's just not possible. There's no way it could happen to me. It could only happen to other people, right? We thought about that with the pandemic, with COVID, of course. That was recent in my time recording this. So, looking at that, we always think these horrible things will happen to other people. But when they happen to us, now it's just the shock. It's like, oh my gosh, it happened to me. And it's really picking out ways to cope. Because I always say, what am I going to do? Cry every single time someone says dad? Cry every time I think about my dad? No. That's not a way to live, right? And I think a lot of the ways that people keep on pushing to live some sort of happy life and get over maybe the tragedies that they've had in their life is by coping with humor, is by having these dark forms of humor. And maybe it's a weird way to do it. Yeah, it really is a weird way to do it. But I think that it definitely is something that needs to be looked at. Because a lot of the time, the dark humor, it can be okay. But it also depends on the situation, right? Because obviously I'm okay if someone, right? It depends on the person again, too, right? Because I'm usually okay if people make fun of me for not having a dad, right? It can be funny. The jokes can be funny. But also, sometimes it can be very disheartening, right? It's like, it's not your loss. There's no place for you to say that. So it really is a weird, nuanced conversation. And that's why I wanted to talk about this topic in today's podcast episode. Because it's super weird and super nuanced in a way that people don't really look at these things, right? We don't really question all of this dark humor. And a lot of our shows, our comedians, our movies has a lot of this dark humor, and we kind of understand it from a very young age. So there's obviously a reason why we use it, and obviously that huge reason is to cope. Because again, like in this quote he said, we like things that are threatening yet safe. So yes, we know there's this big thing that we could probably relate to, right? It's super threatening. But we know in the joke that it's safe. It's like, it's not happening, this or that. And, the other thing it says, they already satisfy half of the requirement, right? So the wrong is the threat, the violation. So, in life, right, when these really bad things happen, if we can bring a little bit of light to the situation, a little bit of a joke, it usually helps a lot of people, and it really helps, maybe the way they look at the situation. So, another kind of part he talks about here is for why people pursue dark comedy. He says, here's a quote, there's what I like to call the, quote, thermostat approach, unquote, in which you're using a joke to change the temperature in the room. So kind of the example that he used, again, is using comedy to cope. And he said, and there's what I call the thermometer approach, where you're revealing the temperature in a room by your joke. So, are you showing, using comedy to show that you've successfully coped. So it's like, if I went up on stage, again, using my own personal example, and I just started crying about my dad dying, well, clearly I haven't successfully coped. But if I can joke about it, that may help someone else in the crowd who might have just lost their father, and maybe that'll help them realize, oh, I can come out better on the end, and I can joke about this eventually one day. So it is a really weird phenomenon. And as well, I think actually this background is super important too. He talks about the question of what humor really is in the first place. As well, I do have to say he is the co-author of the Humor Code, a global research for what makes things funny, and as well as the author of the following Shtick to Business, The Masters of Comedy Can Teach You, and Breaking Rules, again, etc., etc. So that book is coming. It should have already been published. Anyways, so he has 2 books again, so he has been researching this a lot. Anyways, so he says, to answer this question, like, how do we look at humor? So he says, the work that he's done in the Humor Research Lab suggests that people laugh at things, again, that are wrong yet okay. So that was kind of that huge quote that we had there. And, that really is the root of all humor, right? Even if you look in movies, if you look in shows, I think a great example of humor in a very almost basic sense, and maybe I'll get a bit of controversy for this, is the MCU of Marvel, right? I just watched Batman. Great movie, by the way. I highly recommend the Batman. It just came out 2022. Again, Robert Pattinson's in it. He's Batman. Really good. I love Batman. He's my favorite hero. So, for me, obviously, I loved it. Anyways, besides the point, I think Marvel's a great example because a lot of the humor is pretty simple, right? Because the movies are marketed towards everybody, right? Like a 3-year-old could go watch Marvel and nothing bad would happen, right? A lot of little kids watch Marvel. So they have a lot of really, kind of simple, maybe types of humor. And even down to that, if we look at some of those humor, a lot of that is sometimes to cope, right? I think a great example, and this is kind of a trope, but a lot of the times when there's a villain behind one of the heroes, they'll say, oh, don't tell me they're behind me or something. Or in a show, right? And the teacher's behind them and they're gossiping about them. And they look and they're like, don't say they're behind me. And then it's kind of a joke, right? A lot of the times jokes can be situational too, right? Someone trips and falls. It's funny. Maybe they got really hurt, but it's funny that they tripped and fell, right? So these things, it's really, in hindsight, it's funny that we laugh at these things, but it also makes sense in our brains and how we have to almost laugh at things to get through life and to not, be a sad mess all the time. So, he also mentions how people's ability to cope and value of the humor is profound. So he said in his first book, The Humor Code, His co-author and him spoke to a Holocaust survivor, of course, World War II, who talked about how there were, at times, moments of laughter and levity in her concentration camp. That's very interesting to me. So, obviously the victims of the worst genocide, they were the victims of the worst genocide in history, were able to cope with that. We should be able to deal with, obviously, the side of the virus, which he mentioned, because this article was written in 2020, and the fear and all of this and the uncertainty. So, I think that we almost need to use humor to get through life. Because, again, this example of a Holocaust survivor, how are you going to get through the Holocaust where people are dying every single, you see your family die right beside you, you are starving, you are tired, you are getting beaten, you are getting, you're not a human anymore. How are you going to cope with that, right? And then really the only way to be able to do that is humor, right? Using humor as a way to get through that. Because there really isn't a way anybody would survive through such a horrible thing if you're not using humor. If you take everything, you even just need those breaths of hope even. And a lot of the time humor comes into that, right? During war, a lot of that happens. And obviously that's the example we'll be using today, the Russian-Ukrainian war. But again, I do think there is a time and place for some of these things. Anyways. So, there is also another person in this article, who is Alex M. Borgella, who's an assistant professor at Lewis College, Fort Lewis College. Research focuses actually on the consequences of disparagement humor, among other things. So, he talks about how he was speculating about the reason why humor is used seemingly in inappropriate situations. He first looks at potentials to reduce anxiety and stress. So he mentions how they extend research on the general benefits of humor, typically hone in on this kind of anxiety reduction. So people really use humor to reduce anxiety. And obviously, anxiety is, I think, something that we can see in almost every single person. Obviously, there's people who may have severe anxiety, but a lot of the times I think everybody has some form of anxiety. So when we look at humor, it is very transferable, right? These forms of humor, especially dark humor, can be, and especially when we're going through something like a pandemic, can be transferable to a lot of people and can, kind of maybe help that anxiety that may be happening. So, he also mentions that in a variety of situations, like team building, memory, performance in school, variety of others, and, kind of broadly speaking, the vast majority of research on humor reports it is an incredibly powerful tool that facilitates social bonds as well. So again, I always talk about going back through our evolution to become humans. If we go back to maybe even caveman times, obviously we weren't really speaking and we weren't, maybe as intelligent as we are now, or we didn't know as many things. We weren't, developed. But there definitely were probably times of humor, or there needed to be some way to make social bonds. And a lot of the times that could be used with humor, right? Even if you're just banging a stick on the ground and people laugh, maybe, right? There's things to that. And also laughing, of course, we know, releases kind of endorphins and dopamine to our brains, right? So to laugh, it actually makes us happy. Laughing it can make us happy, and especially when we're with people. And we laugh, if we laugh a lot with a person too, we tend to like them more, right? I even see this myself. When I talk to people and I can laugh at them, I like them more, but if I can't laugh at them, I don't like them very much. So laughing even, again, is a very interesting topic. It's interesting that we even make this weird noise out of our mouths, but it makes us happy, but it does, and that's also another part too, and that's why we have that in evolution, to be able to trust people, form social bonds, be with the group, is be able also to have humor and also have laughter, and that's kind of where humor derives too. To be able to laugh, you need to have some sort of humor to it, some sort of element, right? So there's those elements too, evolutionary. A lot of things develop in this way for a reason, and that is one of the reasons, so we can form these social bonds. So that's super important to know as well. Sorry, taking a sip of water. So yeah, again, so this gotta make sure I get his name right. Borgella, was also mentioning how his research, kind of does some research on the ironic social outcomes of this kind of self-deprecating humor, which is the other part of dark humor, right? When you're deprecating yourself, right? Let's say if someone's overweight and they say, I'm some fat guy, right? Something like that, right? A lot of the times with actors and actresses, we see maybe, the fatter people, quote unquote, right? In the way you would think of someone who's bigger, larger person. they're always usually the shtick of the show, right? They're always the laughing stock. They fall, ha ha, the fat person fell, right? And I know, obviously, that's kind of a crude way of saying it, but that really is, in as simplistic terms, how people look at it, right? Oh, the fat person falls. It's funny, right? There's a shtick, right? So that's self-deprecating, right? They're playing a self-deprecating role, in a sense. And a lot of self-deprecating humor also is relatable, too. So a lot of the times people like shows and likes this type of self-deprecating humor because they can relate to it. Oh, I've gained a few pounds. This is funny, right? I can relate to this type of humor. I can relate to this person making fun of themselves. We also tend to like people that are similar on our level, and we can laugh when people can relate to us, right? If a super rich person, super famous person, is cracking jokes about how much money they have, and it's like, oh, I couldn't hit the Maldives the other day. My flight got canceled. It was too rainy or something. Oh, what a horrible situation. You know, you'd kind of look at that person and be like, like, you know, what the heck are you doing, right? Like, why are you, laughing at this situation? So, you know, a lot of the times that's also another thing that we look at when we look at the self-deprecating humor. It is relatable, and again, that social bond and that bond with people is another huge aspect that, really is a reason why we enjoy this humor in the first place. So, again, he mentions how in his research, we typically find decreases in stress response against, when we have the self-deprecating humor, as I mentioned, among the humor's recipients, so the audience, etc., because, again, the humorers themselves. To put it another way, if you can imagine the stress associated with giving a big speech at some large event, research shows you might be able to reduce it by starting off with a solid, self-directed joke. Though a little more complicated, a lot of my work demonstrates similar effects with the industry-related humor, like race, gender, sexuality, and religious affiliation. It's exactly kind of what I'm talking about, right? It is so interesting how we use humor to make fun of ourselves, but it really is about that. So he kind of mentions, you know, even though it seems counterintuitive, dark humor may actually be equally valuable method of anxiety reduction in dire situations. That seem completely hopeless or out of people's control, right? If someone's super depressed, if they can make fun of it, that might actually be okay. And this type of humor especially is found, you know, among death and destruction. Again, war. But he mentions among doctors and nurses and hospitals, ERs, oncology units, soldiers in the trenches during wars, wartime refugees, first responders, and many others as an example, right? And it serves an important alibi and seeming callous function to keep spirits high, stress low, and maintain a sense of humanity where none seems to exist. Really, I think humor is one of the most integral parts of society. I think one of the most integral parts of how we function as humans. You can't, you know, I think one of the times whenever we have characters in a show, and I think this is a great example, whenever we have, one of these examples, whenever we have, I don't know where I was going with this, I'm kind of running in circles with my speech, sorry, I had an email and I was checking it, shouldn't have done that, but whenever we have these, where was I going with this sentence? Anyways, besides the point, you know, to even be human, sorry, now I know what I was going to talk about. Whenever we have in a show and we have a villain, and the villain seems off, or it's an alien, they usually don't laugh, and they usually have no humor. They don't understand us. A robot is a great example. Robots don't understand humor. They don't understand sarcasm. That's what makes them a robot. What makes us human is being able to have humor, being able to have this sarcasm. And, you know, dark humor is a huge part of this too. Again, keeping spirits high. It's kind of this reverse psychology in a sense, right? We're making fun of this horrible situation, but it makes us feel better about that situation because we can have a laugh at it. And again, laughing is a huge part of that as well. So, you know, looking, again, he mentions COVID-19. I think it's especially important to consider these issues when weighing the ethics of the humor, used by medical professionals specifically. So his example is that a doctor or nurse making a joke about a patient's The deteriorating condition might seem crude or inappropriate, but this humor isn't intended to be overheard by the patients themselves or anyone not behind the curtain. Provided this is the case and we cannot make good faith claim that psychology harm is being done, i.e. humor is not being used to bully a patient, we want to be tolerant towards any strategy that helps those who need it to maintain a sense of humanity. And I totally agree with that. I think that it is a time and a place. I think if I was making fun of someone in a hospital bed, right? I'm not a doctor, I'm not a nurse. If I saw someone in the hospital and said, haha, they're dying of COVID, that's a horrible and a crude thing to say. But if a doctor or a nurse is doing it behind the scenes and to make them feel better about themselves and to make them feel better about the situation that is arising, I really do think that it's fine, right? Like who am I to judge if someone is bringing among this humor, not even near the patient, and being able to laugh at something when they are taking care of this patient in an amazing way, right? So I think that this is a huge part of it, and I think that article is a great example from two professionals, obviously, and a lot of my own opinions about why dark humor is kind of used in the first place. So, we're half an hour in the episode. I kind of want to look at the examples right now. I think that might be a good place to jump onto, because I probably won't have time for examples if I don't get to it. So I think I'm going to jump onto that. I'm just going to take a sip of water. I hope you enjoyed those 5 seconds of silence while you're sitting here with me. So I kind of want to look. I looked up COVID dark humor jokes, and I just found this article from Best Life. I do also want to look at TikTok, because that's a huge one, especially with Gen Z. A lot of jokes in Gen Z. But I think COVID is a weird one, because COVID can be crude, like I gave that patient example, obviously me compared to a doctor. But in terms of, like, all of us have experienced corona or COVID, at least if you have been alive during that time. I don't know when you're listening to this, but, you know, all of us have been through the situation, so we can make fun of our situation, right? Like, I made jokes like, oh, you know, maybe I'll never experience high school, right? Because COVID came at the end of grade 8 for me, so I haven't really experienced high school yet. So, you know, I can make that joke. But it would be kind of crude for me to make a joke about someone else, right? So it's really situational. I think that's the interesting part. So let's look at some of these jokes, and I don't really know if I think these are dad jokes. Okay, I'm gonna give you a dad joke right now. Then let's see how this goes. The world has turned upside down. Old folks are sneaking out of the house, and their kids are yelling at them to stay indoors. Okay, this is kind of funny. It's kind of funny. I feel like I'm just giving you guys kind of horrible jokes right now. Okay, number 2. Let's see this. Oh, okay. We remember the toilet paper fiasco when everyone was overbuying toilet paper for some reason, because, you know, you're home and you're gonna need bundles of toilet paper. Anyways, this joke. If you need 144 rolls of toilet paper for a month-long quarantine, you probably should have seen a doctor long before COVID-19. Ha! Right? These are just kind of silly dad jokes, and actually this was not what I was looking for. Best Life, by the way, I'm not linking this one because I didn't really need to do that. I want to look at TikTok, because TikTok is a very interesting place, and I think that a lot of the reason why I wanted to listen to this derives from TikTok. So I'm not going to play the sounds. I'm going to play it in my ear, but I don't really know if, cause I don't want this, obviously, I don't know if podcast episodes can get claimed, so I'm just not going to risk that. I'm gonna look up COVID jokes. I don't even think that's gonna be good, man. I don't even know. Like, this is a very difficult thing to look up. I had so many, too. I had so many COVID. Okay, let's see. Okay, so this episode I'm currently looking at, this TikTok I'm currently looking at, these are all not good. I've seen so many. Okay, so I have a stand-up comedian here. He says, I don't think the virus was made in China. I think it was made somewhere else, but it was just way cheaper to manufacture in China. Okay, that's kind of a funny joke. Okay, we were deriving from the China, right? Manufactured in China joke. We're moving on to, you know, it's it's kind of funny. I mean, I really wanted to find a proper kind of COVID because I've seen a ton from Gen Z, and I think the curve though of all the COVID jokes has kind of stopped because everything is lifting, as I mentioned. All the really big COVID things are lifting, and everything's kind of going back to normal. So there's not as many jokes, but I do remember a lot, and maybe I'll derive from what the little I remember from this kind of blur of the 2 years. I do remember a lot of people making jokes, kind of like, oh, I'm never gonna have a proper year, or someone gets COVID and said, oh, I'm gonna die, right? And like it's pretty it's pretty it can be funny, but I also think it can be kind of crude in a way. I think a lot of the time, a lot of COVID jokes could be really bad. Again, that doctor example I think was great from the Gizmodo article was really great. Because it really did kind of talk about the differences in people and the way you're using dark humor to cope. But I also think in terms of internet culture, like it is nice when I'm going on the internet and I'm seeing COVID jokes, and it's kind of a relief. But sometimes I just don't want to look at it, right? Like I remember during COVID, I was like, I just don't want to. I want to free my mind of this in a different way. And sometimes the jokes were just so repetitive as well. And I think that's a huge part of dark humor. Right? Like you'll see a lot of the same maybe fat jokes, same dead dad jokes, same this, right? And, obviously people use humor to cope in different ways, but it can be, kind of repetitive in a sense as well. And I think a lot of the COVID jokes were. So I think that was another huge aspect and why a lot of people kind of got sick of those jokes. So I might not, if I come across it, I might turn back around to the COVID jokes, but right now I want to look at the World War III jokes because I think that is the kind of most important one to look at. Because this is the one that I've seen prominently on my For You page way too often, and this is kind of what sparked this podcast episode, to be quite honest, and last week's podcast episode. So, okay, the whole joke is that World War III will start, right? So, obviously NATO getting involved. I'm not going to go into the details, I'm sure. If you're listening to this, you'll have some sort of idea. But, sorry, I just had to sip of water. The whole joke is that World War III is going to start. And I've seen this joke for years, actually, before there was even a conflict with Russia. We've seen this joke a lot, but right now it's a little bit more real, right? And I completely understand when someone in the Ukraine or in Russia are making these jokes, or if they're making, wartime jokes, right? That's their place. But I find it really weird, and this obviously is kind of an exaggeration, but this does happen, when some random kid from Wisconsin, who will never have to fight in a war, ever, is making these jokes saying, I'm gonna go get drafted into World War III, right? I think that's the biggest one. I'm gonna be drafted into World War III, guys, or I'm doing, I've seen the ones where people are doing pull-up competitions where they're like, I'm gonna get drafted into World War III, shoot, I'm too strong, all these jokes, right? So, I mean, they are funny, they can be funny, but it also is in a way, like, it's very, it puts a bad taste in my mouth sometimes, because it's like, what are you talking about? Like, this is never going to happen to you. I don't understand why you're using, these incentives to talk about it, because it's very real, right? We see soldiers and citizens and people dying in these war-torn areas and their countries going to rubble, and you're making a joke saying that you're going to have to fight in their war, right? These people just want freedom. And you're joking about something that doesn't even relate to you, right? Like, again, it's like if me talking about some COVID patient that I don't even who they are, and joking about them having COVID, like, what right do I have in talking about that, right? But I also think it is very weird and nuanced, too, because World War III could technically happen, right? And I'm not going to go into those details, but it could happen. But it's also, like, it's not, and there is no place for a joke. Like, I just don't understand why people are, right? So currently I'm watching one right now about final U.S. soldier in World War III, and this guy's saying, I need backup. And then the HQ, the headquarters, is saying they're on their way. You don't hear them, question mark? And then the U.S. soldier says no, and then he looks behind him, and he says they're back. And then it's all these kind of meme jokes. So one of the meme jokes is like, people who fought in the 2018 Furry War. And it's like a whole crowd of people, like a whole video crowd of people. Okay, it can be kind of funny. Like, I personally, this, I don't really understand this joke particularly. I didn't know there was even a furry war in 2018. But everyone's like, oh, this is a great war. Oh, the true veterans. Oh, yeah, I'm a furry war veteran. And it's like, it can be very tasteless in a way, especially on TikTok. TikTok is a very tasteless place. I think I need to preface that. Should have prefaced that a long time ago. But I think TikTok in general is a very tasteless section of the internet. Like, you don't really want to be on TikTok. Very tasteless, not really a great place to be. So the fact that they're making these jokes and these things are happening on TikTok is not a surprise, but it really should be a surprise, right? Like, I shouldn't be able to go on this section of the internet and have all these really crude jokes, especially, really I want to say, the reason why a lot of these jokes rub me the wrong way is when they don't relate to you. Again, those World War III jokes I never have understood, because they're talking about something that they're never going to be even related to. Like, people are making fun of the people actually making, like, saying they're going to get drafted, because it's like, you're not, buddy. Like, this, you're making no sense right now. So I think that's another really huge part of it. Again, it's pretty funny in a way that, you know, we're talking about humor in this sense where it's, like, crude, but it can be very crude, and it can be very tasteless, and there's a time and a place for it too, right? Like, I also think that if, you know, there's a time and a place for everything, and sometimes people do not have good timing in terms of these things, and they don't really understand how to use it, and I also think that's something that, you know, needs to be kind of looked at and thought about, in a sense. So I'm going to try and find some more World War III jokes, because, you know, these are kind of the ones popping up a bunch. Okay, this is the one that is popping up so much, and actually I have not talked about this. So President, Zelensky, the president of the Ukraine, is currently fighting for his country. Let me preface this. He's a comedian. He was a comedian. He's the president of Ukraine. He is fighting for his country on the front lines, right? He is in the war. He is fighting. A lot of people on the internet are just saying how hot he is. They're saying, oh, this man is so attractive. And this one really rubs me in the wrong way. And I think this is a great example of one rubbing me in the wrong way. Because this is not even relating to anything that can relate to you. You are talking about a man who is fighting for his country in a war-torn country. And you're sitting over here on your couch, not in the war. And you're like, oh, this guy's so hot. Like, it's so tasteless. And a lot of people are saying, yeah, he is. But then also a lot of people are saying this is really tasteless. This guy, you can respect him. You can say he's a very respectable man for his country. The thing he's doing is very respectable. But the way you're saying this guy is hot, quote unquote, or whatever you might be saying, it's, you know, it's really concerning, right? Someone in the comments here, right? They said, this doesn't sit right in my spirit. And then someone replied to that saying, I know, there's many videos like this, and gives me the ick. The ick is kind of like this ucky feeling, right? Like, ew, like, why are you saying this? This is great. Someone replied to that comment, again, I'm going on a thread currently on TikTok. Also, the person, actually, I'm not gonna outwardly say anybody who posts these jokes, because I don't want to out anybody. These jokes you can find anywhere. I think all these jokes are everywhere on the internet, so I don't think it would be very hard. But another person replied saying, I told her, and I also don't want to out someone too, and, you know, this person said, I told her it was inappropriate to post, and she responded to me by saying, quote unquote, inappropriate is my middle name, which is really gross. Again, people are saying it's a lot of privilege to be able to say this. And, again, and I'm glad people are pointing this out. They're saying, guys, he's putting his life on the line, this is not the time, right? Or saying, read the room. You know, and someone else said, you know, y'all don't need to sexualize everyone. Again, I need to agree. I don't know how I like this comment. Because someone said, you know, here, the comment on our video saying, I feel like it's weird to sexualize him, especially with the situation that is going on. Read the room, which I agree with. Like, why are you sexualizing this man in the first place, right? Whatever, he's a public figure, okay, you could argue that. But then why are you sexualizing him while he's in a war fighting in his country and his family is about to get attacked? Or like they fled to another, I don't know where they currently are. They fled to another country though to be protected. And he's fighting for his country. He's putting his life on the line. And you're saying, oh, this guy's so hot. Like, what are you doing, right? And this woman replied to that comment saying, sexualizing it is taking it too far, which she did technically sexualize it. Anyways, she said, enjoying the presence of a masculine man standing up for his people who is an outstanding human, that's attractive. Like, girl, like, I don't even know what to say to that. Like, how do you respond? And then a person responded again. You made a thirst trap for him, and yet you aren't sexualizing him. Okay, right? Like, you know, mocking her. You know, everyone's saying, you know, there's a war breaking out, and people are simping for the Ukraine leader, right? Simping kind of like, if you don't, I don't know what that means in terms of Gen Z words in a way. It's kind of falling for a guy, like, oh, I love it, like, looking at a celebrity and just, like, loving them so much, and, you know, whatever. And this person said, again, this person's pretty problematic in a way, and saying, I bet people simped back then, but there wasn't social media. It was a, we don't talk about it subject. Like, probably, someone said, yeah, probably, but sexualizing it, you know, this guy could die, right, in a literal war. And it's really concerning that people are doing this. So, okay, this one is kind of okay, and actually, I think I liked this one too. I think I laughed at it. So people have been drafted to surrounding areas around the Ukraine, and there's people in the army making jokes like, this is the future World War III background. Okay, you know, it's a dark humor joke, right? It's supposed to be kind of like a little bit of a shock element. That's the point of dark humor. It's be like, oh, you would say that, but it's funny. And you know what? But the thing about this post is, that's different than the other post, is that these people are actually going to be in a war, or they could be in a war. So them joking about it is okay, because they could be, right? It's a fine line. It's a fine line. I think it's a case-by-case scenario. And some of these, like, can be tasteless, but it's like, some of them are funny. One guy is on a tank here in the States, and he's like, I'm finna pull up to Ukraine. It's kind of funny, kind of tasteless, but it's not as bad as the president one, I think, because he's not outwardly saying this and this. You know, a lot of these, you know, it can be kind of, they can be funny, but it's also pretty tasteless, right? I've seen a lot of these army people talk about it, and I think, you know, that's okay, right? It can be, it can, again, it's a fine line. I just think the President Zelensky one is very concerning, and I think that one especially is kind of, you know, tasteless, very tasteless. I think I'm going to stop it there in terms of all the examples I'm going to give. There's tons online you can see. But I think internet culture in general is pretty crude. I think a lot of the times whenever I see memes, it can be crude. And I think that's kind of the point of it. It can be funny. And I think there's a time and a place, too. I think simping over a man, quote-unquote simping, or, you know, kind of sexualizing a president, romanticizing a president who's fighting in a war right now is probably not the best thing to do, and I think that one's very tasteless. But if, you know, you're in the army and you're making a joke saying, oh, it's going to be a future World War III background, or, oh, I'm going, you know, to fight in World War III, you know, it can be funny. And you know, that's okay, right? I think there's a fine line, and I also think it depends who you are, right? I'm usually pretty calm with how people use humor, which maybe it doesn't seem like it in this episode, but I am usually pretty calm with how people use humor. I'm never like, oh, you're being offensive. Obviously, if it's very offensive, I'll say it, but if it's something, like, silly like that, I won't say it. But also, you know, there's also big lines that I draw, like the President Zelensky one again. I think that's a huge line to draw. And I also think things like, a few other ones. I think the COVID one's okay, but again, that doctor one, I think if I was making fun of a COVID patient, that's just bullying at that point, and that's a totally different topic. So I think dark humor in general, to kind of wrap up this episode, I didn't really use any articles. I used one, and then TikTok. I do want to say before I end this episode, the TikTok videos I use, again, I'm not going to out, I give credits to everybody, but I'm not going to out the people that had the TikTok videos because they were jokes that I kind of said were bad, and I don't want, you know, them to get outed, of course. So I'm not going to say those. These jokes I've seen repetitively used in a lot of different places. I've seen a lot of the President Zelensky ones. I've seen a lot of the army ones. I've seen a lot of their drafting ones. I've seen a lot of the COVID ones. So I think that just getting a general, I used a real life example, but I think getting a general gist of that without using someone's personal information is fine, and I don't want to out someone, of course. So to kind of wrap this up, I think dark humor is good. I think there's a time and a place, and I think for anything in this world there's a time and a place. But humor is definitely something that makes us human. You know, humor is something that we need to use. Laughter is something that we need to use. And if using dark humor makes us a bit happy in a really stressful or a really hard time, you know what? You know, pick your battle, choose a hill that you'll die on, and I think it's fine. I think there is a time and a place, of course, and there is really crude things that can happen. And there's times where you probably shouldn't be using dark humor, for sure, especially if it doesn't relate to you directly. I always think that's a little weird, but I think that it is, there is a reason why we use it, to put it in that way, right? There is a reason why we use dark humor, and there is a reason why we're attracted to it. And, I think a lot of that reason is, again, social bonds, our history, our evolution. But I also think a lot of that can just come from coping, relieving anxiety, relieving stress. And I think it is a topic that's open for discussion. Again, everything is a case-by-case scenario. The world is not black and white. So looking at these situations in different ways is okay. And I think dark humor in and of itself is not bad. I think that it is the way you use it, and the way, if you don't use it in a tasteless way, is always the best thing that you can do. And again, case-by-case scenario. So I hope you guys all enjoyed today's episode. Next week's episode might be an FT. It might be Russia-Ukraine. You'll have to go check it out next week. Next Tuesday, it will be on time, 6 a.m. Again, sorry for posting this late. It'll be on time next week. I did technically post it on the right day today, though, so we'll be all good. Anyways, so if you want to connect ever and see whenever a new podcast episode will be posted, please connect on my Instagram, @ever.changingworld. Again, Instagram, @ever.changingworld. Twitter, everchangingwor. Everchangingwor. My website, which you're probably using right now, but I'll say it again, is shows.acast.com/ever-changing-world. Again, shows.acast.com/ever-changing-world. Again, thank you all so much for listening. Please tune in next Tuesday for a new episode. My socials are linked in the bio. The article I used today is linked in the bio of today's episode. It always is. Go check out all the resources. Think for yourselves. Think about what you think of dark humor. You know, make an opinion. Think about it. Talk about it. Talk about it at dinner. Talk about it with your family. Talk about it with your friends. Leave it up to discussion. That's always a great time. That's always why you listen to podcasts. Anyways, thank you all so much for listening to today's podcast episode. I hope you all enjoyed and have a wonderful day. Thank you.